Shift to sport mode, traction control in sport, boost building, left foot on the brake pedal, and we go. Wow, 0 to 100 in 5.7 seconds. Electric cars are boring, you say? Well, keep telling that to yourself.
You're watching the autoX YouTube channel. You can also get your daily dose of all things automotive on our website, autox.com, and follow us on social media. Don't forget to check out our monthly magazine and make sure to hit the bell and subscribe button so you don't miss a thing.
Every time you say the word EVs, it raises quite a few eyebrows. And there's a very simple explanation for that. You see, electric vehicles, well, they are a relatively new technology. And as a result, there's a lot of hype, excitement, and curiosity around electric vehicles. Now, all told, it's still early days to take electric cars seriously. But at the same time, you can't really deny that they are the future. And of course, they're coming in thick and fast in the Indian market, especially at the higher end. However, if electric vehicles are indeed the future, well, they have to be at the bare minimum as good, if not better, than their ICE counterparts. Now, case in point is the all-new Audi e-tron, Audi's first ever electric SUV. Now with this, Audi claims that they have made a car that's as good as its ICE counterpart. That means it looks conventional, it's as comfortable, it has the same sort of performance, but it comes from the future and it has zero tailpipe emissions. So how much of that is true? Now the first thing that you notice about the e-tron is of course the way it looks. And in that department, it is very Audi-ish in the sense it is like a conventional Audi. Now, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, well, it's up to buyers to decide. But I think it looks modern, but at the same time, it's also a bit regular. If you're looking for something radical, like say how Tesla has done with the Model X, that's those Falcon doors and all that stuff. But Audi has gone in a totally different direction. They decided that they wanted to stick to the regular. So this car, of course, it looks very much like the Q5, but it has those e-tron elements. In fact, it's based on the same MLB Evo platform as the Q5, which has been modified for, of course, the electric drivetrain. But overall, the platform is the same. And which is why this car also weighs nearly 2.5 tons. Now, that is a lot of weight. But that, of course, comes mainly due to the battery pack, which alone weighs 700 kilograms. Now in terms of size, of course it's slightly larger than the Q5 but smaller than the Q7, but it's wider, and inside, as we'll later on find out, it's more spacious as well. The interior of the e-tron is very much like a conventional Audi, like say the new A8L or the Q8. So of course you get these two touch screens here. MMI infotainment system, you get a 10.1 inch touchscreen at the top, and then you have this thing for climate controls and other settings, which is an 8-inch screen. So overall it's quite handy to use, and I think with Audi screen they're really crisp and really high quality. So it's really a great touch. Of course, this is something that we have already seen with other Audi cars, and this also gets this great haptic feedback, so that you know whatever menus you are navigating through, whatever things you are clicking on. So that gives it a nice touch and it's easier to use. But at the same time, I also have to say that sometimes you have to press it really hard, and that's quite difficult, and sometimes you are really pushing it hard. So that's, I think, one of the negatives. And the screen is a bit of a fingerprint magnet, so of course that may also create problems and you have to wipe it out on and off. Other than that, of course, there is the Audi virtual cockpit, the brilliant full HD screen, and I think it is one of the best. Actually, I'd say it is the best digital instrument cluster that we have seen across industry. It's great. The resolution is really great. The readouts are really big, as you can see the dials and everything. You can also have the navigation over here. So overall, it's a very practical, well thought out and very neat layout. So I really love it. Apart from that, you also get heads-up display, and overall the quality is really great inside. It is an Audi at the end of the day, so that means it is really perfect in terms of interior quality, in terms of the touch and feel of all the components. So it feels really rich and premium. Now another thing, you also get these paddle shifters, which are not actually paddle shifters. These are just paddles to change the brake recuperation system. We'll come to that later on.
As you might have noticed, the India spec e-tron doesn't have virtual wing mirrors. Audi tells us they've given it a miss based on the feedback received from prospective customers.
So overall, is there anything that I don't really like about this cabin? Well, I think this portion, the center console, is a bit busy in the sense that the design is a little weird. You have this hole over here and the cup holders are really deep, and even though you have wireless charging for air, it's also quite deep, and sometimes your phone is kind of stuck there. You really have to pull it out. Apart from that, this handrest is a nice touch because it helps you navigate through the functions and just work on the touch screen easily. So that's a nice touch. The gear lever is also different. It is small and it's tucked below this handrest, and it's quite nice to use. So I think it's a very smart touch. These are some small details that sets it apart from conventional Audis. So again, it is a great interior overall. Now this is where the e-tron outshines its regular counterparts, as in compared to the Q5, there is a lot more space, there's a lot of headroom as well, and that's mainly due to the fact that it has a nearly flat floor. That's of course because of the fact that it doesn't have any transmission tunnel. So the floor is flat, there's no transmission hump, and as a result the seats are low, and you can sit in an upright position, and it's very comfortable here. So even if you are 3 people at the back, I think you can sit very comfortably here because there's a lot of space. Propelling the e-tron is a 94 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. Now it powers 2 motors, one at each axle, so that means it is an all-wheel drive. Now the total power output stands at 402 bhp and it develops 664 Nm of torque. But that is to grab headlines, because actually this car produces, like in normal driving condition, it produces just 355 bhp and 561 Nm of torque.
And that's because the full power is only unleashed when you put the gearbox in S or Sport mode. That's when the system activates boost mode for a total of 8 seconds. In boost mode, the e-tron does 0 to 100 km per hour in 5.7 seconds, whereas in normal or D mode, it does the same sprint in 6.6 seconds. The acceleration isn't exactly breathtaking, but this is a pretty quick car, especially considering the fact that it weighs nearly 2.5 tons.
Now acceleration wise, of course, that is pretty quick, but when you're driving this car, this being an electric, there is instantaneous torque, so it just takes off like really impressively. However, that's not the main point, because what I really like about the performance of this particular powertrain is the way it delivers punch in the mid-range, if I can say that. So basically, when you're driving in the city and you just touch the throttle pedal, it just flies. It is just the mid-range performance. Let's say you want a quick overtake and you find a gap and you want to exploit it, it just goes there. That's where this is really different from a conventional petrol or diesel Audi. So that is where you really notice the performance. Of course, another part is that it feels very normal, apart from the noise or the lack of noise. Well, it feels like a proper car. There is nothing really that that sets it apart, in the sense it is quiet, it is refined, and there is virtually no noise inside the cabin, not even of the electric motors. So in that regard, it's very quiet, it's very electric car like, of course, but as a car it doesn't compromise on any front, because the performance is there. The grunt from the motor, like, it's really instantaneous and you really enjoy it, especially in the city. Like I said, when you have to exploit a gap, when you have to pull a quick overtake, this is where this car shines. And I think in that department, performance wise, really no complaining. Now, another thing really impressive about this car is the way it rides. It rides like a normal Audi, as in the ride quality is just phenomenal. And even though it rides on 20-inch wheels, the ride quality is phenomenal. And that's down to the fact that it comes with air suspension as standard on all 4 wheels. So the ride is really supple, it's really absorbent, and you've got 7 driver profiles, so you can change the ride height for different conditions. In off-road mode, the ride height can be increased by 35 millimeters, which can be further raised by another 15 millimeters. So that means a total of 50 millimeters. You can increase the ride height if you're going to go off-road.
That said, you don't really need to be in off-road mode in daily driving conditions. In fact, in its base setting, the e-tron's ride height of 178 millimeters is more than adequate to go over big speed humps without scraping its underbelly. That's quite impressive when you consider the fact that it has a 700 kilograms battery pack mounted low down on the car's floor. For instance, when we drove the Mercedes EQC, it kept on scraping its underbody while going over speed breakers. The e-tron does a much better job in comparison.
Now, how does it drive and handle? Well, in that regard also, it's pretty good. Of course, it's a very heavy car, and like I said, in straight line you don't notice the weight, but when you're doing a quick overtake, when you pull out of the lane and then again you pull in, I think that's when you feel the weight, because in lateral movements you can feel that weight swinging the car around, and that's when you actually feel that it's a heavy car. But I don't think it's a deal breaker. Of course, it's a heavy car, and you have to live with that fact that electric cars are heavy in that sense. But when you're driving normally, if you go hard around a corner, it really corners well. The steering is quite direct, even though it doesn't have a lot of feel. So that's a very typical Audi trait. But it's direct, and even the body roll is very well contained. So in that regard, it's a great car. It's a great handler as well for a car of this size and this weight. I think it does remarkably well. It masks its weight really well. And another interesting thing about the e-tron is that it's primarily rear wheel driven. That means only the rear motor works most of the time. The front wheels are only engaged when there's a slip or the car detects that you're doing something silly. Otherwise, it's mostly a rear wheel drive SUV. So in that sense also, it feels very performance oriented, and it is decently fun to drive. The e-tron is equipped with massive 18-inch brakes with 6-piston calipers. However, you won't be using them most of the time. In fact, according to Audi, 90% of the time you won't be using the conventional brakes. So why is that?
The e-tron uses a clever electro-hydraulic braking system that uses a combination of regenerative braking from electric motors and friction brakes. For braking forces up to 0.3 G, which Audi says is the case 9 out of 10 times, the e-tron uses just the electric motors to slow the vehicle down. However, when more stopping force is required, the e-tron's computers automatically engage the hydraulic system with disc brakes and pads within just milliseconds. What's more, thanks to its clever brake recuperation system, you can even drive the e-tron with just one pedal. As soon as you release the accelerator pedal, the brake recuperation system kicks into action and can slow the vehicle down by up to 0.1 G. It has 3 modes, 0, 1 and 2, which can be selected using the paddles behind the steering wheel. When set at 0, it allows the vehicle to coast without any resistance or drag from the motors upon liftoff. In level 1, the motor can decelerate the e-tron by up to 0.03 G. While in its most aggressive setting, or level 2, the system decelerates the vehicle by up to 0.1 G without touching the brake pedal. And while all of this is done, the battery pack is also being charged. In fact, if Audi is to be believed, 30% of the e-tron's range comes from the brake recuperation system. Speaking of its range, Audi claims the e-tron can drive anywhere between 350 to 450 km on a single charge. But given our chaotic driving conditions, you'll struggle to get anywhere close to that figure. Realistically, you should be looking at 250 to 300 km of range. As for charging, using a 22 kW home charger, the e-tron can be charged up to 80% in around 4.5 hours. Using a 50 kW public charger, it'll take around 2 hours to juice up the battery pack to 80% capacity.
After driving the e-tron, I've come to the conclusion that the e-tron is actually a very solid package. I think Audi has done a really great job. You see, here's a car that's not just green, but it's also a complete vehicle in every sense. It has got the performance, it has got the looks, it has got the space, and it has got the features and equipment of a modern petrol or diesel Audi. In that sense, it is a complete package. So are there any real drawbacks to speak of? Well, to be honest, I think this car is complete, like I said. But you can complain that it looks a little too regular, in the sense it doesn't stand out from regular models. Of course, it has some e-tron bits, so it will help you identify that this is an electric SUV. But for someone who's looking for more pomp and show, I think this is not the car. If you want to make a statement with your electric car, I don't think it really stands out that much. Of course, I'm not saying that it has to look outlandish, but it would have been better if it could just differentiate itself from the regular Q5 or the Q7. Now, apart from that, of course, it's a little too heavy, and that shows when you hustle it around corners really quickly. But I don't think you're going to do that with a practical SUV. So even that thing can be overlooked. And of course, last but not least, it is going to be a little too expensive than a conventional Q5 or a Q7. So it's not going to come cheap, it is going to be expensive. Now let's cut directly to the chase. Should you invest your hard-earned money on an electric car in India?
To be frank, there's no straight answer to that. Personally, I believe that if you're buying an electric car as your only vehicle, it's better to sit on the fence and wait, as there's virtually no EV infrastructure in the country right now. But at the same time, if you have a spare crore rupees lying around and you have other cars in your garage, you should definitely try and embrace EVs. Be a part of the future if you have the means. For daily duties, these cars offer the same level of comfort, performance, and driving pleasure, but they do all that with zero tailpipe emissions. These high-end EVs, such as the e-tron, aren't really a compromise. In fact, they give you an early preview of the future of automobiles.